Christopher Feran.
Hello.
Hi, welcome to the podcast and
Thank you.
happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for doing this on your birthday. I really appreciate it.
I mean, what better present is there? This is great.
I'm the one who's getting the present on your birthday by getting to talk to you. So cheers to you, mate.
All right. All right. It looks like bourbon. It must be elixir.
It looks like whiskey. Feels like. It tastes amazing. Let me assure you that's an Ethiopia Adinesh. I never know if I'm saying these names correctly. I feel like I should be putting like an ethnic slang, like a twang onto it. And the only one I end up doing is Arabic because that's the only ethnic twang that I know.
I mean, that's the closest that there is. It's like, because when you go to Ethiopia, like the only language that everyone speaks is Amharic, and it's not like there's Rosetta Stone for it. And so you just like get by and you're like, you shit, and you like do the best you can, but like, no.
So how often have you been to Ethiopia? Wait, let's back up a second. Let's tell anyone who's listening what you do.
Okay.
One of the many things that you do.
So my name is Christopher. I'm a coffee buyer for Phoenix Coffee Company in Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm also one of the partners. And I do consulting on the side with all of my abundant free time, helping companies get started with roasting or building and planning cafes. I help on the origin side as well. So I pretty much just do what I can to not get bored. So yeah, I keep pretty busy.
How long have you been in the coffee industry? Because you were my luckiest find in Seattle this past SCA. I feel like I'd never heard of you. We happened to be working in the same space while we were doing the workshops. And I'm like, who is this guy? It's nice when you come across people who know what the fuck they're talking about. and you knew what the fuck you were talking about. I'm like, how come I haven't ever met this guy?
It's just really well-rehearsed lines that I'm repeating, you know? Like I went to the bar the other day in Columbus, Ohio, and I was talking to the bartender. He asked me about the Cavs, and I was listening to NPR that day. I didn't even know that the Cavs was the Cleveland team. But I'm like, oh, yeah, he's putting up a lot of three-pointers. Like, it's the same shit with coffee, man. It's just like, but I've been in coffee for about almost 10 years at this point, since 2009. I first started off as a barista. It was just my side hustle. Because, you know, I graduated during the height of the Great Recession. So I graduated college in May 2009. So my intended career path, which was to go into some interesting work in the government, did not come to fruition because of all the budget crises, because we have very responsible government. And so I took the first job I could find, which was doing administrative work for a vaccine clinic, a travel medicine clinic, and hated it. So I started working nights and weekends as a barista, just figuring, you know, I'll pay for law school or grad school, or I'll do something cool after this. And then coffee is coffee. And I got sucked down the rabbit hole and moved back and forth between where I was living, which is Cleveland, and the East Coast 3 times, I think. So yeah, and it just got further and further down. And so it's all I do now.
What did you study at university?
I was, it was a choose your own adventure major. So back in the day,
Brilliant.
Yeah, it was interdisciplinary studies. So I have a Bachelor of Philosophy in Interdisciplinary Studies.
When I'm 80, I'm going to go back to university and study philosophy.
It's beautiful.
Either philosophy or quantum physics, one of the two.
Both very practical, you know, so.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't do anything with either of them, really.
Yeah. Well.
Not at 80 anyway.
How many of us are using our degrees?
Sorry?
How many of us are actually using our degrees, practically speaking?
Well, hi, I'm one of those who is not. So, I feel you there. I feel like I meet so many people in the Australian coffee industry that have studied science and ended up as baristas, trying to follow a career in the music industry and ended up in coffee. Yep. And you find the same thing here, but a lot of the people in the coffee industry went to school and studied theology.
Yeah, it's really true. There's a huge amount of people who get into coffee and from that vector.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's the thing that surprised me the most about the American coffee industry is how religious it is.
Yeah, it always shocks me too. I have to be very, very careful and mindful when I'm at conferences because I can be somewhat crass, particularly surrounding topics that others hold sacred.
Uh-huh.
But luckily most of the Christian or other religious people in coffee are actually really cool. So.
Yeah, I agree. I find that too. It's been a real culture shock for me. One that I'm still getting used to, and one that I just need to.
Whoa! I thought I put everything on Do Not Disturb here.
Right.
Super good at this.
Yeah. Whenever my phone rings, every device in my house rings, and it's like, fuck.
Yeah, I didn't know you had to set them all individually. Okay, well, I did that now. So we're good.
Great. So we happened to meet through you working with Lucia or Lucia. Lucia. So let's talk about all of that cool shit that's happening. It's just such an exciting, I want to say new world, but it's not new. But, like with everything that's an overnight success, it's been 10 years in the planning. Whether it's in the music industry, coffee industry, anything that's innovation. And in the last podcast, I was talking with Cosimo, and, even for those guys, they're seeing that the future is fermentation of coffee. So I have a limited understanding of fermentation and the way that it works through my genetics degree because I studied a lot of microbiology.
Sure.
But so much has changed in the world of science since I did my degree. Talk to me about the bugs and the coffee and the fermentation, and tell us the real talk about it.
So I think this is like one of the more interesting conversations to have because it highlights what's so cool about coffee and also what's so frustrating about coffee at the very same moment. So Lucia and I met 2 years ago at SCA in Atlanta. I was traveling with my friends who are importers. I had just been traveling and sourcing with them and done some other work on their tech systems. And so I was sitting there at a meeting with them, and Lucia had the next meeting. And so my friends were still wrapping up, and I was just sitting there at the table with my drink hanging out, and she thought that I was with the importers. And so she just sat down and started giving me her spiel, like none the wiser that I was not actually who she was meeting with. But I reacted very positively and was receptive. And, I do have some background in science, so I could understand what the hell she was talking about. And I guess she decided that I was the first person she had met in her very short time at that point in coffee who understood what she was doing. And so we stayed in touch. And then I helped her get started on her own when she left Scott Labs and became an independent consultant. And in my role as a coffee buyer, I've been working a lot with her. Most of the coffee that I buy now has been processed either using her method or processed by her directly. And so, done a few trips with her, traveled together, processed coffee together. We've collaborated on many projects. And I really believe in the work that she's doing, and I'm excited to see that other people are picking it up and running with it.
And the three of us are going to collaborate, aren't we?
That's right. Yeah, we're working on a coffee from Rwanda. So Lucia just processed this coffee about 3 weeks ago. I'm hoping to get samples next week, if not the week after. It's going to showcase the effect the processing can have on a cup. So we'll have one it's all using the same cherry, by the way. So it's the exact same lot of coffee that we just put in 3 different buckets, essentially. The first is going to have very, very limited amount of fermentation. So it was mechanically demucilaged. So using a machine, we removed
Can you tell people? Oh, yeah, sorry, go on.
So we passed the cherry. It was all floated. And then we passed the cherry through a machine, which not only takes off the skin, which is the normal process, but uses friction and water to remove the pectin layer, the mucilage that surrounds the parchment. And then we took that parchment and sent it to dry.
And so the friction that you're talking about in that, exactly what kind of friction is that? Is that friction of the water? Is that friction of rubbing the cherries together?
No, it's rubbing through the machine. It essentially grinds off that outer layer, because the pectin in and of itself is not water soluble, so it has to be removed through some sort of mechanical means. There was some pectin left on the seed, is what Lucia said, but she didn't think it was more than like 5 to 10%. We're thinking this is going to come out being more like a so-called white honey process, but the amount of fermentation is going to be very limited, and so we think the effect on the cup should be very limited. So in my mind, this is going to showcase the cultivar.
Okay.
So this is like the purest look.
I wanted to ask you something there. So when we're talking about very limited fermentation, we're talking about the fermentation that comes from the process up to like the natural fermentation that occurs that you're not invoking. Is that right?
That's right. So in that case, there's yeast everywhere in the environment, on our skin, in the air, in the tanks, and the machines, the water, everywhere. So there will be spontaneous fermentation anywhere that there is food for these microorganisms. Yep. And so that mucilage has sugar in it. And so that's how a fermentation would naturally occur. So even with a very limited amount, we suspect that there's going to be some fermentation occurring, whether or not it has an effect on the seed at that very low level, especially given how quickly that would dry. We don't think it would have much of an impact. And that was the goal here, is to just showcase the cultivar.
And we would consider that zero fermentation, or would we consider that? So when we talk to people about it, are we going to tell them that there was no fermentation that happened? Because I think that wouldn't, on one side, it's not accurate. And on the other side, it is accurate in relative to the other two.
So when Lucia talks about this, she says that mechanical demucilagination is the only type of processing in which there is no fermentation occurring. So in dry processing and wet processing, other than mechanical demucilagination, you have a fermentation. Whether or not it has an effect on the cup profile is a different question that is a lot more complex. So in this case, we would say that the fermentation does not have an effect on the cup.
Okay, let me break that down further. So it sounded like you made a differentiation there between dry processed, or natural as some people call it, wet processed, or washed as some people call it, and then there's the mechanical demucilage. Help me.
Yeah, so mechanical demucilagination.
You know how many times Lucia's tried to get me to say that, and I just can't. Demucilagination.
Just think about it like, during like a breakdown in a hardcore song where you got the cut time with the demucilagination, and that'll help like really get it.
Amazing. Like
I've been thinking that this whole time, and everyone looks at me like, what?
Demucilagination.
Yeah, it's got a ring to it.
Yeah. I have to put it in a melody and then it will work. So help me there. So it sounds like the mechanical demucilagination is separate completely from the dry process and the wet. Is that right?
So you've got wet and dry.
Yep.
So all that means is, did you remove the skin?
Right.
If you did not remove the skin, it's a dry process, even if there's water involved. You can float the cherry, you can ferment the cherry in water and then send it to dry. It's all dry process.
So why do they do that? Sorry, why would they? Okay,
if you look back in the history of coffee processing, going back 100 years, when these terms were developed, it was really rudimentary. And so you either did one or the other. And then we've developed these little micro processes or alterations off those two main forks in the time since. Mechanical demucilagination actually came after washed coffees.
Okay, so the dry processing can even so they pick the cherries, they put it in water, then they take it away to dry process it. And the other process is put it in water,
remove the skin. Right. And then you can do whatever you want. At that point, you just remove the skin, so you can send it to dry, which is a pulp natural or a honey process. You can ferment it and then send it to dry without washing, which is a honey process, or you can wash it and then it's a wash process. Yeah, there are a lot of different choices. And so that's part of what we're trying to showcase here. It's not just if it's washed. You know, a lot of coffee bags will say process washed.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't really mean much. So that was the other point here. So we had three, we're having 3 coffees in this set.
Excuse me.
The first one has minimal effective fermentation. So that's the mechanically demucilaged one. The second one is a more traditional washed coffee. We did inoculate. So we took a microbe, in this case, a yeast, a strain of Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and inoculated the tank to control the fermentation. We'll get to that in a minute. We're letting it sit for a certain amount of time and then washing the coffee. And then the third and final coffee that we're showcasing is the same process, but with a different amount of time. And so it's trying to showcase how you can impact the cup profile by letting the metabolism of these microbes change, or watch these different compounds develop and then permeate into the seed as that contact time extends. And a lot of that goes against your traditional understanding of processing, because, you know, Sivitz wrote his book, Coffee Processing Technology. He says that, you know, it's been well established that an increase in processing time does not lead to an increase in cup quality. That was his belief. And so once you remove the skin of the fruit, get it as quickly as possible to the drying beds or the patios or whatever it is, because it's vulnerable in that time in between. You get spoilage. And that's true if you're using more traditional methods and you're not controlling the fermentation. But whether you're using temperature control or inoculation, there are ways that we can manipulate that fermentation to produce desirable results in the way that a winemaker would, or a distiller, or a beer maker, brewer, whatever. And so it's really just taking Lucia's background in winemaking. She worked as a winemaker in Napa for almost a decade and went to UC Davis and studied viticulture and enology. And so this is just how she thinks about it. It's been standard practice in winemaking to inoculate your fermentation since the 70s. I mean, they introduced these commercial yeast 40, 50 years earlier, but it took 5 decades to really catch on. But
I hope it doesn't take that long for us. I
don't think it will, because of the accelerated pace, and because we're starting to see producers really understand the benefits. The only issue I'm seeing is with the cost and the completely fucked up way that our coffee supply chain works, and how long the chain is, and how the producers really don't get to set their own price. Like in wine, if you are a grape grower and you are making your wine, you in some sense are setting the final sale price. And in that sense, you're controlling the sale price of the grapes. But in coffee, it's still very driven by the demand side. We will, we've got our commodity market, and whether or not we want to look at it, the specialty market is still somewhat tethered to the commodity market.
Let's break that down for people who don't understand what's going on with that, because I don't know if you read it, but Mark Dundon released an article this week on LinkedIn that was called "The Death of Specialty Coffee," or "Specialty Coffee is Dead." Did you get a chance to read that?
I did not.
You would really like it. I'll include a link with these show notes, and I'll send you a link.
Great.
And I reached out to Mark. We're going to try and get him on the podcast next week when he's in Amsterdam. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. Mark's a brilliant person and a brilliant mind, and this is really pissing him off, as it should be. After I understood, or started to get an understanding of what the problem was, I immediately thought we need to get more people hearing this and understanding it. So can you break down what you're talking about there?
Yeah. So it's complicated, but basically, if you are a person who grows coffee, you have your trees, and you either typically will do one of a few things. You can sell your cherry to somebody and they process it for you. Or you can process it yourself, and you either sell your coffee either as a pulped coffee, but wet pergamino, which you do in Nicaragua, for example, or you process it all the way till dry, like in Colombia, for example, and then you sell it to somebody else. But even from there, it goes to another level. Either it'll go to a coyote, or it'll go to a purchaser who's usually an exporter. Yeah, a middleman, and then it goes to another middleman, and then it goes to somewhere else, and you're compounding all these costs. But ultimately, the price that is paid to the farmer is very likely not tied to their costs of production. Their costs of production tend to be fixed. The amount of inputs, their seeds, the labor costs, things like that, they can predict, they understand, and they don't vary that much year to year. But the C market, which is the commodity market for coffee against which we trade if you're dealing in any sort of volume, tends to be very volatile. So right now, I think it's like at $1.15, which is basically your C market price, which means $1.15 a pound. There are very, very few places in the world. I'm being generous here. It's really just Brazil, where a producer could get paid $1.15 a pound and make a living, make money. And only producers of scale could do that, who are extremely efficient with labor and mechanized and to the nth degree.
Cheap labor, right? Really cheap labor.
Cheap labor, and as little as possible. But other places in the world where like Colombia, labor is extremely expensive and it's hard to come by. Because they've got so many other industries, legal and extra legal, that can afford to pay a higher price for labor. And so in order to get pickers, coffee has to pay the price. They're also more difficult terrain, so it's more difficult to mechanize other than places like Antioquia. So you tend to have a lot more costs and lower yields. And so we're looking at the next generation of coffee producers, because the average age is over 60 years old, and people are going to university, they're learning tech, they're learning medicine, they're trying to get out. And so we're looking at this phenomenon where there's just a possibility of a diminishing supply, not only because of climate change and all these other real pressures, but because of economic pressures. And so we need to really think critically as an industry about how we interact with this product, which is an agricultural product, and how we market it. And this is, I mean, if anybody's read Mark Pendergast's book, Uncommon Grounds, this is like stuff that he talks about through there, just like the history of colonialism and slavery and imperialism and how it's led to the demand for coffee and the way that we used it to control people and, feed our own appetites for this product. And their pricing, the American government got involved in all the different price controls and against the valorization schemes in Brazil. Like, there's a whole history of this, and it's all coming to a head now in our lifetime.
Help me understand, who sets the C price?
That's basically done. It's a speculative market. So anyone can go buy these commodity units and trade on the C market, which is out of New York. And it tends to be large trading houses, brokerage firms, and speculators. So there are times when they have really long contracts that all come up at the same time, and that leads to essentially a rush on the market and causes these spikes, which creates a boom bust cycle, like we saw when the coffee market spiked in 2010, and it went over $3, and now we're back down to $1.14 just 8 years later, which is two planting cycles, really.
Tell me something.
And that instability, yeah.
No, go ahead. And the instability.
What it does is it creates this boom bust cycle, which just continues the cycle of volatility. And that's just, I mean, this is why I don't purchase that way anymore, because I'm trying to achieve some sort of stability for these producers, and as well as achieving stability for my supply that I need as a roaster. Moving, if specialty would move more towards fixed year-over-year contracts, rather than being obsessed with cupping 60 coffees on the table and choosing a new one each year, then I think we would achieve some modicum of stability. And
explain that further. I think that's important for people to understand. Explain that idea further.
Sure. So I've been told that the way that I buy coffee is kind of unusual.
That doesn't shock me about you, mate.
But this just comes from my own personal philosophies, political and geopolitical philosophies. But When I buy coffee from a producer, I essentially say, hey, I'm going to buy coffee from you for the next 3 to 5 years. This is the premium I'll pay. If your coffee scores above this, I'll pay an additional premium. If you want to hire a consultant, either an agronomist or, you know, someone like Lucia, here's an additional premium I'll pay. Let me know what else you need. That's pretty much how I do it.
And you go one-to-one with the farmer, right?
One-to-one with the farmer. I establish a fixed price, which is negotiated directly with them. We look at their books together. We go over their costs. We decide, you know, what they need to make, because if they're not making money, then I'm screwed. And we set that price and we say, are you happy with this price for the next 3 years? And they say yes. And I say, great. And then that's how we proceed and move on. But I think a lot of buyers tend to be concerned with establishing the best coffee program for their brand, which I totally get. I understand. Wanting to showcase the best coffees you can in a diversity of coffees. And so they'll go to origin and they'll be at export tables and be presented with, you know, 60 or 100 of the best coffees from that country or that harvest. And they'll cup through and they'll say, I like these 3, or I like these 5. I want to buy these. But they cup them blind. So there's no way to guarantee that even if you are paying a premium to that producer, that the next year they're going to get that premium. It'll just keep bouncing around. So the net effect is zero. You're not actually elevating the industry in any way, because who knows why it was good that year? Maybe it just happened to be really cold, so it extended the fermentation to 60 hours underwater, and they just happened to have amazing native microbes, and it just produced this baller coffee. And the next year they had a heat wave, and then it rained, and so the fruit was all messed up, and then it was hot when they were fermenting, so it was 12 hours, and they didn't get the advantage. Who knows? But if I work with a producer and say, I'll buy from you for 3 years, I will come spend, you know, a week or 10 days processing coffee with you, and you know, implementing the method that Lucia taught them. And then we're able to incrementally improve each year, because we're able to apply a little bit more control. And all the while I say, you know, if you ever get a better price, you sell to them. That doesn't hurt me, because, you know, there is a lot of good coffee out there. And ultimately I'm the one with the power. I can buy any coffee from anywhere in the world, and there are only so many options. Even in competitive places like Colombia, there are only so many places where you can sell your coffee and get a good price. But usually the way it works out is, even if they can't fulfill, say, order 70 bags from this harvest, and they don't have that much coffee, and they're like, hey, I got a really good price, but I still want to sell to you. I'll say, fine, sell me 30. And then they're liberated to get that better price and reinvest in their farm.
So it sounds to me like you are invoking this very strange kind of philosophy called relationship building.
How about that?
I know. I'm shocked.
It's almost like this thing that we do at our cafes, where we have our regulars who come in and give us 80% of our money. We're doing that at Origin.
Yeah, it's a really novel concept.
Yeah.
How have we not figured this out earlier? I mean, I know that there are people out there that are doing it, but it isn't about the 1 and 2 and 10 people that are doing it. It's about us doing it as an industry.
It's difficult to do. I mean, it requires a lot of training. It requires a lot of knowledge that most people who've only been in the industry for a few years don't have. I mean, I've been doing this for almost a decade, and I'm still learning something new every day. But I didn't feel like I really had a grasp on this until fairly recently. So I think importers are really valuable to our industry, and they serve their purpose. I use them still, you know, particularly for logistics and financing, and ensuring that everything goes smoothly. And for young buyers who don't have access to producers, or who don't know how to arrange these things, the spot lists are great. And I even use them, you know, when my containers are late, just to fill in the gaps. But I think as we mature in the industry, developing these direct relationships and seeking out producers as much as we can and engaging with them can be very, very helpful. There are tons of caveats to this, because I see this go awry all the time. But I think it's an important thing to pursue.
Tell me, if somebody wanted to get started doing this, I guess there's 2 things that people can do. If people want to source coffee that's been this thoughtfully acquired, they could buy grain from you. Is that correct?
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I order all the coffee before it's even picked, really. While it's just flour. and then set up the contracts that way. Lucia goes and processes it, and then we have the bags available. So right now I'm basically only buying coffee that I use, but it would be very easy just to increase the amount of coffee that we order.
So plug your business, right as we're starting this conversation. What's the name of the business?
The
importing.
The importing it's Hinterland Coffee Strategies.
And I'm going to get you to send me a link to that, and we're going to include it in the show notes.
Sure.
Hinterland. We don't say any of the R's in Australian, so it's hinterland.
I've heard you say R's. Come on.
It's when I'm starting. It's really quite bizarre. I have to try very hard not to say the R's that I have to exaggerate when I'm speaking to Australians. So I've started saying things like for and here and there. But hinterland will always be hinterland. It won't be hinterland.
Yeah.
You'll notice I now say Elixir specialty coffee and Lee Safar, not Lee Safa, which is how we say it in Australia.
Have you ever pronounced the R's and spoken really slowly?
Dude, I have that problem with the word brewery. I can't say it.
There are too many R's. But there's this theory of the Western or the Southern accents in Southern American speech, that it's basically just like a bastardization of the English accent, spoken really slowly, which I think is like a really interesting idea. But I have no idea if it's true. But yeah.
How does it sound?
The American Southern accent, it's like that twangy thing.
Don't try it. It just won't suit you. You're such a polished individual.
Oh.
No offense meant to anyone who speaks like that. I've heard it and it doesn't sound.
I adore the accent. I adore it. But I just can't do it.
It's you definitely know when you've got into an Uber with someone who's from the South. They're very charming, and on top of the accent, it's a little bit dreamy. I will just say.
It's totally dreamy. It's totally dreamy.
So if someone wanted to buy from you, they would go to hinterland.com.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's Hinterland Coffee Strategy. We'll figure that out later.
We'll figure that out. We'll include a link to the show notes. But if somebody wanted to start this journey on their own, how do they go about it? Where's the first place to start? Because in our Map It Forward workshops, the ones that we do around roasting, Scott and I keep talking about, because he's always the co-mentor on the roasting ones.
Mm-hmm.
We always talk about this idea of when you have your own business, you don't need to go to Origin and get photos taken at Origin just for Instagram reasons.
Right.
But we do want people to start being very considerate about how they spend their money and where they assign those costs. So how can people use the money that they have available to them to start this journey of dealing direct with farms and basically establishing long-term relationships?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
So it requires a lot of organization. First of all, it requires a lot of budgetary discipline. I mean, I actually think that most of being a coffee buyer is understanding how to balance a budget and use spreadsheets.
And cash flow. And
all that kind of stuff. Cupping is actually like one of the lesser important tasks. I know that's probably heresy, but that's just my belief.
We're going to do a Map It Forward workshop on mapping a career as a green bean buyer.
Cool.
We might tap you for coming on board with something like that.
Great. I'd love to say all sorts of heretical shit.
Hey, we're all about it, as you may have been guessing with Map It Forward. We're saying all the shit that nobody's wanted to say, but everyone knew we should say, and then they're pretending that, oh my gosh, you shouldn't have said that. It needs to be fucking said. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So your fellow roasters and green buyers are great resources. Chances are anybody who is roasting in your town or in the next town or, outside of your market maybe is not big enough to be able to make a huge purchase from an individual producer. So you can partner with them to bring in a coffee or to buy that coffee, offer more security and a better price. So seek out other people on our end of the supply chain who are already doing this. That's a really great way to get contacted with producers who are doing good work and seeking buyers. That's the first thing. Another way is to go to SCA, and there are all sorts of producers walking the floor trying to meet buyers, just like you. So introduce yourself, go to the events, go to the booths, talk to everybody. That's a way that I've met some producers that I buy from. And
the other thing is Instagram.
That's what I was about to say. That was the third thing, is Instagram. Most producers who are trying to do direct work are on Instagram now, and they'll follow you. Follow them back, message them, ask for samples, and be thinking about not this harvest, but the next harvest, is what I have to say. Taste what they have to offer, and, be true to yourself about what it tastes like, but also understand that this is somebody's work. And this is, the piece of land that maybe they didn't buy or didn't choose, and they were born where they were born. So be kind, and be open in your feedback, but understand that this is just where we're starting. And then if you're going to work with this producer for 3 to 5 years, you can make it better through your relationship with them.
So let's focus on that, because we have, I feel like in our industry, and I'm the person who's calling this out a lot at the moment, and I'm going to keep calling it out until it stops happening. People find it very difficult to admit that they don't know. They don't know how to pick a great coffee. They don't know what something should be tasting like. They don't know how do I actually start tasting a coffee with a new farmer and know that it's the right coffee for me. So, like, if I was getting into this, and there's a reason I'm not a roaster, I just don't think I'd be any good at it. Let's say I decided I was going to overcome all those hurdles and I was going to start roasting tomorrow, and I need to pick my coffees. How do I start that journey with a farmer? And we know we can contact them through Instagram. We can go to SCA. We can build relationships with them in other ways. But let's say they send me samples. How do I know whether this is a good coffee that's at the starting relationship? Is it just that, well, I think it tastes great?
So that's a pretty packed question. So say you get a green sample. I would say you better know how to green grade, number one. So you should green grade that coffee. You should do a physical examination, check the moisture level, the water activity if you can, put it under UV light and take a look at what's going on there. Then after that, you better know how to roast a sample roast really well. This is one thing that I see a lot of the time, is that people reject good coffees because—
Don't bait me with that statement.
I know, I feel like I'm Scott here, but like, if you don't know how to roast,
he and I talk about this shit all the time.
Yeah, it really hurts me because I've seen so many good coffees get passed over because the sample roast was baked or underdeveloped or whatever. So, if you get Nikawa, I don't know, I'm not meaning to plug anybody in particular, but like, I love it because it's great, because my producer has one, I have one, my importer has one, everybody has one. We're all using the same profile. We're all tasting the same coffee. With those altitude adjustments,
must make,
of course, but
for a dreamy supply chain.
It's beautiful. It's totally transparent.
Can I ask you something there? How long did it take for you guys to get that flow? Did you guys make decisions based around, okay, so we're all going to get the same sample roaster, we are going to work towards this goal? This is starting to sound a little like a map to me.
Yeah, I mean, you have to aspirationally dream, right? What do you want your ideal supply chain to look like? Well, I want it to be as short as possible. I want it to have as much supply side benefit as possible. And I want it to be totally transparent. And that includes, we need to be able to taste the same coffee. Since we can't cup this together all the time, we need to get as close as possible, which means roasting. Because when you understand the effect of roast on a coffee, that becomes pretty clear.
Which is something that's massively understood.
Yeah.
In our industry. And honestly, until Elixir came along, I didn't know how to taste the effects of a roast in coffee as clearly as you can in elixir. You've tasted it. You know how you can taste a baked and an underdeveloped and a well roasted coffee. But I think that there is so much our industry needs to start stepping into now. As we move forward, if we want to move forward with any kind of integrity, it means baristas and roasters need to start being able to differentiate the difference between what's going on in a cup because of the roast, what's going on in a cup based on extraction, and what's going on in a cup based on the quality of the green. And they're all very different flavor cues, if you like. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. Yeah, and my head goes in a lot of different directions, because while I do believe that like maybe 50 to 80% of the population won't be able to taste the distinct differences in roasts that we might notice, to me it's like, you know, it's like a pad in a recording or a baseline. Like you don't notice it until it's gone. Right. And it's with green coffee in particular, when you're looking at it and roasting it, how it roasts can reveal things about the way it was produced. And understanding as much as you can about the processing, which is something I always ask for. I have a little survey I send out, like, what did you do at this step? What did you do at this step? Can change your perspective about whether or not you should buy that coffee, work with that producer, or whatever, or what might need to change. I just roasted a bunch of Lucia's coffees because she had a workshop in Charleston that I came back from. The coffees that have been inoculated for whatever reason, they tend to roast much more like dry processed coffees. And they also don't experience as hard of a crash at first crack. Sometimes the first crack is even very difficult to detect. They're just like beautifully descending rate of rise curves the whole time. And and you know, we have our theories about why that is, but she hasn't sent them for a GC analysis yet. So we're trying to figure that out. But, you know, if you roast a coffee and you come out with a ton of Quakers, obviously that's revealing something, right? That's in your SCA score sheet.
Right.
For the analysis. It's like, okay, maybe they have issues with floating and they need to float. They need to do a double float in parchment as well. Or maybe you're discovering something about the way that it was dried, or the way that it was stored, who knows, or something in the dry milling. All of this is something that you need to figure out, how this food product was treated along the various stages of processing. Otherwise, you have no real way to give feedback. Like if I give feedback to a producer and say, I scored it at an 82, it was a little thin and had a vegetal finish. How is that helpful? Like, what the hell are they supposed to do with that? Say, oh, great, next time we'll make it better, and just do the same damn thing.
Well, bearing in mind also, someone said to me the other day, you understand that at the farm, they don't know how their coffee tastes.
That's
the
right.
way that we process it.
That's right.
Well, we extract it. It's a whole, I can't remember who it was that I was talking to the other day that said to me, a lot of the time the farmers contact them and say, can you tell me how this tastes? Because I don't know if you guys like it or you don't like it, or if it's working or it's not working.
Yeah.
They don't have espresso machines there. They don't make V60s.
That's right. That's right.
In Guatemala.
And like, you know, if you look very puristically at what CQI's goals were, that was one of the goals, is to provide objective feedback, calibrated feedback to producers. And then they started finally doing the CQI producers class, the processing class, which is supposed to connect these things and teach producers how to experiment. But, you know, for most producers, they try all sorts of things just to see what happens. And it doesn't go far enough to achieve cause and effect so that we can actually improve and iterate year over year.
Is it also because we haven't reached the masses with this yet, that we've got such a long way to go, where we need more people to get on board with understanding how important all of this is?
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, little things that producers just happen to regionally do. And, you know, you go the next town over and they don't do. You're like, why does this coffee always taste so good from this town versus this town? They've got the same altitude. They've got the same cultivars, everything. And it's just this one little tweak. And yet we keep giving different feedback. And it's, yeah, I don't know. We are privileged to have as much access as we do. But we have for so long glossed over the effects of different things. Like the one conversation I got into with Scott recently was about polishing green. So in some markets of the world, they ask for the green coffee to be polished at export, which means it's literally the silver skin is removed.
The parchment?
No, this inside the parchment, there's the little.
Okay.
So it's the chaff that comes off during the roasting. Yep. So some places in the world or some buyers, they ask for that to be removed through polishing. And so I was in Ethiopia and asked an exporter to set up a blind trial. They were selling a lot to the Japanese market, and their buyers wanted it to be polished because the aesthetics of the green was very important to this buyer. And so that's just their standard process. And so I had them replicate 4 samples on the table. 4 of them were polished and 4 of them were not polished. And we cupped them blind on a table with 16 other coffees. And the 4 that were not polished all cupped a point higher than the ones that were. And so it's just like little tiny details like this, and that you figure, oh yeah, you're introducing friction. That's probably destroying some of the soluble materials, our things that we transform during the roasting process. And if you start thinking about this, it's almost like blockchain, where you're taking this thing and you're transforming it and you're transforming it and you're transforming it and you're transforming it. And there's no way to really connect like sugar in your cherry versus sweetness in the cup. Like that might not be a direct link, but you can look at the transformations that were made with this raw material as you're molding the clay and say, okay, A caused B, B caused C, C caused D, and then you can chase it back through. But you need to understand each of the decisions along the way. And
I think that's the problem. That it's such a complex issue as our industry experiences a whole new boom in a different direction. And I think that direction is we all need to understand what the fuck we're actually doing. And we don't. I think that's where we're eventually going to reach a point where we must have standards, and we don't have those right now. We don't have any kind of standardized approach to this is the way that this needs to go for a whole bunch of shit in our industry. And because we don't have that standards, we are all trying to like walk around in the dark expecting that, well, I remember that somebody told me that this is the way it's supposed to go, and that person's written a book, so it must be like that. But the person that's written the book has evolved since he wrote the book, and he's got a whole bunch of new ideas. Not talking about anyone in particular. But that's I think what the problem is. We don't, I'm in a couple of Facebook groups, which is really interesting. I'm there so that I can learn from other people, but I'm also there because I want to see what the chatter is in the industry. And there's a roasters one. Again, I'm not a roaster. I am at this point not expecting to be a roaster, but I am opening my first cafe in 15 years, and it will be in a place where there isn't a specialty coffee scene at all yet. So I may have to learn how to roast at some point, because Scott's already told me he won't come there. Anyway, so in this group, the number of newbies that I see that turn up there, trying to learn, trying to understand, trying to figure out what the normal way that things are done is, only to be told by other people who are new, they've been roasting for 6 months, this is what you should do and this is why you should do it, when they actually have zero fucking idea of what they're doing. And even me, a non-roaster, I've gone to a lot of Scott's talks, so I know look, I've not roasted physically, but I know a little bit about the knowledge behind roasting, for lack of a better word. And I can tell you they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And this is dangerous because we don't have any standards when it comes to growing coffee. We don't have any standards with roasting coffee. We don't have any standards with extracting coffee.
Sure. I mean, to some extent, that's always going to be part of the problem, but also that's part of the beauty of it. I wanted to just add a little sidebar about, like, can you now imagine that you have young buyers are giving feedback to people at origin and saying things like, have you tried carbonic maceration, without really understanding what these things mean or imply, or, hey, you should plant geisha, which is like, please don't tell them to plant geisha. Whatever you do, just please.
We really need to get this mapping thing for green bean buyers done as soon as possible, because
Yeah.
that's what I'm afraid of. You know, these people who have worked or gone to Origin once, it's the same as with roasters. People have been roasting for 6 minutes, think that, you know, now I'm a master roaster.
Yeah.
I've been to Origin once, now I'm a green bean buyer.
Right. It's like my coffee tastes pretty good when I roast it. You know, most of the time I can drink it, so I feel pretty happy with that. But I'm still trying to learn more. And I think that's the mentality we all need to adopt and just keep learning. You have to be just that amateur curiosity and keep rolling.
And it's this thing that I was talking about before of don't be afraid to admit you don't know. Most of the people who you're going to speak to actually don't know, even if they are saying to you that they do know. I have really gotten excited about this thing that I've started doing over the last few years, is looking for people that know shit that I don't know, and finding strength in vulnerability in saying, can you teach me about? I don't know about green bean buying. I don't know about roasting. I don't know about fermentation. I have, you know, the tiniest bit of seeded knowledge that has seeded and piqued my interest in wanting to know more. And now I have a podcast where I can bring people like you and Lucia and Scott and a whole bunch of people on here and say, hey, I want to have a long format conversation with you and ask you all the dumb, stupid questions that people might otherwise be too scared to ask anyone else. And I'm going to happily take one for the team. I'll never forget. We when we did the basics in coffee roasting workshop with Scott, the idea behind it was that Scott was going to teach me how to roast in front of everybody.
Oh God.
Right? And I'm the safest person for him to do that with, because it's me and we know how to communicate with each other. We talk every day. So I'm like the safest person for him to do that with. And the comments that came back were, Lee's asking all the dumb questions we're all too scared to ask.
That's great.
Oh, another one said, it's really good having Lee there. She's asking all the stupid questions that none of us want to ask.
That's beautiful.
I'm like, well, that's the point. That's why I should be the person that's there. People need to not be scared to say, I don't know, can you tell me about? Instead of trying to sound like they know what they're talking about, there's nothing smart about that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I always invoke the axiom, if you're the smartest person in the room, find a different room.
Yeah, man.
That's what I'm constantly trying to do, is find the smartest room. So I feel really, I want to feel like a newborn, you know? And travel helps, meeting people helps, going to industry events, you'll find those people.
Yeah, and connecting with them online. I'm finding that that's the funnest way. Look, admittedly, I'm in a very privileged position. I have a podcast now, and I can say whatever the fuck I want, and I can. I'm humbled I'm humbled by the fact that so many rad people want to come and talk to me on this podcast and have conversations. And because of that, it's bringing more people to want to have a conversation with me. And I acknowledge that privilege, and I'm very fortunate to be in that situation. And so I can ask people the stupid questions, and I'm happy to do it in the interest of other people hearing the conversations, and then hopefully going and connecting with those people and them wanting to start conversations with them themselves. It often blows my mind when I see people having the opportunity to meet with someone that's absolutely rad and finding some weird ass industry ego reason to not connect with them. It's like, you dumb fuck.
We have so many cool people from cool backgrounds in this industry, and like, you know, it tends to be when I'm talking to somebody about music that I learn something about coffee. Right. You know, it's like you just got to find a way.
Yeah, and I'm so excited about our future.
Yeah.
As an industry, I'm so excited about it. I was watching a documentary about Warren Buffett last night, and he said a really fantastic thing. He said for so long in this culture, and he was talking specifically about the American culture, for so long we've excluded the smartest half of our population. He was talking about women not being able to be included in things. And look how far we've gotten. Now, the smartest half of our population is being integrated into the decision making.
Well, like in coffee, we've got a long way to go. I'm sitting here as a white dude, like, you know, cis white male, part of the issue. But I think that we are making strides, particularly with the Coffee 2 movement and, you know, some of the gender equality stuff. I think it's really great. And, you know, even when our work at Origin, focusing on young women producers and things like that. Great.
And look, as a straight Arab woman, I can tell you that it hasn't been easy in any way, shape, or form to become someone who has this position in the coffee industry. I battled for a long time. The Australian coffee industry is hugely male dominated. And pretty soon we're about to announce something that's going to be happening in Australia around Map It Forward. And once we've got it all locked down, we'll do that at the end of this month. But for that to be able to happen was an enormous journey for me. For me to be legitimized in our industry took a long time for no fucking reason. And what I think is happening right now is we are starting to look at a form of equality that's still got so far to go, but at least the conversation is happening now. And that's really important. I don't know a single gay person in the coffee industry in Australia. That needs to change. And the reason, I don't know a single gay person in the coffee industry in Australia. Isn't that terrible? And you know why it is because from my experience, there's a very machismo heavy presence in the coffee industry in Australia that isn't as welcoming as it should be to that kind of openness. And I'd love to see that change.
Yeah.
It's not even as open to women as it should be.
Yeah, we have our own problems in the US. I'm only familiar with the scene here. And you know, the countries that I've traveled to, I have some exposure. Obviously, it's not the same because I'm coming in as a buyer. You get a certain perspective. But I'd like to think that maybe that the changes that we're starting to see, particularly in the last year in the industry within the SCA, might propagate to other countries like Australia.
So are you referring to, we're about to enter some hot water here.
Yay.
And I'm all for that, but if it's going to make you uncomfortable, just say so. So are you referring to the decision not to go to Dubai? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that was kind of a hot button issue, right? For a lot of people, and it's been a lightning rod for some of the activism that we're starting to see. I still think that the activism is in an early phase, but it will mature in the coming years as our culture shifts. I think, you know, America is ready for a woman president at this point. I think that would be like really important thing and will cause a cascade of effects in every industry. But the reaction to Dubai, I thought, was really encouraging. I mean, it was at one point a little shocking to see the disconnect between the so-called leaders of SCA and its actual constituents. But I'm glad that nobody took it lying down. I think it's great.
You and I are we're going to disagree a little here. And I love that because from disagreement comes, especially with two people who have such open minds as we do. I think this is going to be really fun because I'm really ready to learn from you here. So it was really interesting to watch. For anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, do you want to go ahead and explain it? Do you want me to explain it?
I'd go ahead.
So there was a decision that was passed that by the SCA that, an initial decision that SCA would not be going to, they would be going to Dubai. They would be holding an event in Dubai. And then there was uproar. And from that uproar came a decision of deferred candidacy.
Yep.
Right. There was massive uproar about it, and everyone lost their shit, etc., etc. And in all honesty, I was really quite shocked about it, and I thought that the response was the right words. I want to. This is the first time we've talked about it on the podcast, and so I want to make sure that I find the right words. I felt that the response was very linear, and the response was a little focused on the American experience without the focus of what the decision actually means. And so,
can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So I believe in equal opportunity for everybody, and I am staunch on that. I believe that we should be protecting each other. I believe that we should be fighting to make sure that every single person has the opportunity to participate in whatever way that they want. And I want anyone that's listening to this to know that I employ trans people, I employ gay people, I employ men, I employ women. To me, people are people. And I want to state that before I say anything further. The problem for me with the issue that people were having with the deferred candidacy thing was, one, I have a lot of friends who live in Dubai, and some of those friends are gay, and they've been living in Dubai for the longest time. They're all they all work for Emirates, and they're all, there are a lot of men that are working for Emirates that are gay. I happen to know some of them. And when this initially came out, I contacted them and I said, listen, do you think that this is fair? Because I don't want to I know that you guys live in Dubai and that you've happily lived in Dubai as a gay couple. What am I missing? And they said, look, it's just people not these are Americans as well. I should clarify that. But the deferred candidacy went further than that. People were against deferred candidacy without understanding that the deferred candidacy applies to people not just in the US. It applies to people who can't get visas to come to a lot of these competitions because America won't issue these people visas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
These are people who spend a lot of money on trying to get to competition level and become the national champion, and then want to compete. And after spending all of this money, they find out last minute, sorry, you can't have a visa, you can't compete. And so therefore all their efforts are gone. This is where deferred candidacy is a really great thing. It just means that perhaps in the next year, the competitions will be held in a country that the person can get a visa for. And this is where I felt that the deferred candidacy uproar was unfair. Do you see my point there?
I do. And, I absolutely think it's somewhat hypocritical because we are in a position where essentially in the US, our borders are being closed, and all of the news this week surrounding our border crisis, which is, right, something we wake up to every day. But I see the deferred candidacy solution to the problem as being kind of a technical fix that kind of misses the point. It seems to be a slightly hindsight's 2020. Sure, they already decided that this was going to happen in Dubai. They didn't really consider that there was going to be this uproar. The decision was made, and then they had to find a way to make it work. It's sort of how I interpreted it, and it's an imperfect solution. And I definitely hear your point. I think I would rather just see SCA take a more thoughtful approach to entering decisions in the future. And deciding how the industry is going to present itself and what types of people we want to be represented in the industry, particularly since it is such a white male dominated industry. Mm-hmm. It screams of exclusion. and really, and I know some of the people on the board, and I've had private conversations with them, and I know that there were other views expressed leading up to that decision, and I'm happy to hear that. But I did find it pretty disappointing that there just was this sort of thoughtlessness, and then that it led to a reactive decision rather than a proactive decision.
Do you agree that I'm gonna ask you a couple questions here? Do you agree? Because from I want to qualify this first. From my understanding, the big problem was that let's say a trans person wanted to go to Dubai, they felt that they were going to be executed, right?
Well, not necessarily executed, but they were going to have trouble. They would feel unsafe.
Okay. Do you think that any of these trans people that had intended on going had any intention of acting disrespectfully in that country?
No. I mean, right. I don't believe that, no.
Right. And so as an Arab, I will say that and when I say I'm an Arab, I was born in Australia, but I was raised with those kinds of values, like Arab values. And I've visited Dubai. I've visited Syria multiple times. I know how these people think. They're very hospitable countries. Mm-hmm. And so if you're going to a convention and you are dressed in whatever way it is that you feel that you want to dress, I don't believe that anyone's going to turn up there and be dressed as like an overt queen, right? I just can't imagine anyone from our industry being.
I mean, if that's how you dress on a day-to-day basis, then you do you. Like, I think that the problem is that then you're just basically relying on the circumstance of people being kind rather than having the full protection and openness of the law and of a society that actively encourages, welcomes you to be yourself.
So here's where I have a problem with the hypocrisy of that. A lot of the countries, I'm not saying you're being hypocritical. I mean the people who have a problem with that side of things. Mm-hmm. We're happy to buy coffee from countries that have a much more staunch approach mm-hmm. on people's gender fluidity. Mm-hmm. But we're not prepared to turn up to Dubai and try and experience a culture that, unless you are going out there to make a fucking point mm-hmm. and dress in a way that you know is going to offend, then I'm not sure that we're holding ourselves accountable to a continuous to any kind of a continuum that makes sense. Do you hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, and there's a phenomenon in social psychology called the mirror exposure effect, which is basically just from knowing people who are different from you, you will learn to like them over time, whether or not you want to. It's just what happens, and that's been observed. And so I do think that there is value in going places where you do not feel welcome or you do not feel comfortable and meeting people, both to address your implicit biases as well as theirs. And it's really tough because our entire supply chain, like I alluded to earlier, is built on colonialism. And a lot of those things are still very much present in the way that we operate. I don't think it's great for America to take the moral high ground. Like I know that 3 million more Americans voted for a person who did not want to close the border than someone who did. But that is still the leader of our country right now. And that is the way that we are viewed around the world. So individual citizens cannot necessarily be held responsible for the views of their government. I agree with that. Right. And we are penalizing people from a certain part of the world because of their government's actions. And that feels wrong to me. But I would like for there to have been a more open dialogue and conversation rather than just the announcement and dropped and without any real discussion surrounding it.
I hear
It
you.
was not done tactfully
Not
or
at all.
inclusively.
Not at all. And I think we've lost a big opportunity as an industry. I think Dubai being a place where specialty coffee is booming right now,
Booming. Yeah.
and we have an industry that could really, over there, uh, who could really use the encouragement and could really use so many of us going over there to be a part of what they're experiencing and to form relationships and to do all this kind of stuff. These people are so hungry for connection. We all remember what it was like when we were starting off. I'm lucky enough to have experienced it in the Australian coffee industry and now in the American industry. Can you imagine how much support and encouragement that they need that we can provide? And that love that's exchanged when you feel supported has nothing to do with your gender. It comes down to humanity. It comes down to these people are coming to our country and we're going to be as hospitable as we can be because we want to show them that we welcome them.
Yeah.
We've lost an opportunity to include ourselves and these other community into the worldwide community.
It's true. But, I think that the fact that we're having this conversation actually shows a lot of alignment. And that's really cool. We are a young industry still, and we're deciding who we want to be collectively, how we want to be portrayed, the type of world we want to live in, and we're just really just trying to figure out how do we create that world.
I agree.
That's awesome.
I think we're in quite the weird adolescent stage where we don't really know if we can talk to that other person or we can't talk to that other person or what's acceptable. And it's like that thing of, I really like him, but I don't know how to let him know that I like him. I feel like that's the dance that we're doing right now. And I feel that we did some damage by having gone about the process the way that it was done, because and when I say that, particularly the outrage that came from it, did people think that the coffee community in Dubai weren't listening?
Right. It's very othering.
And exactly. And I know for a fact they were offended. They were offended because it wasn't the people that people are attacking the governments over there. People are attacking Sharia law over there. These people are trying to innovate. They're trying to be part of something that's new and cool. They don't give
global.
any fuck.
That's something that's global.
Exactly. And I think that we missed the opportunity not only to go over there and participate in that and encourage them and make relationships, but we also have given them a reason not to come here.
Yeah,
that's not great.
Maybe it's just because of his recent death. But like, what would Anthony Bourdain do?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And that's why I think I really appreciate you having the openness to talk to me about this, and because we do have slightly differing opinions. I think we both agree on the fact that we just want everyone to have the opportunity to equal opportunity. I'm not a big believer in equality of outcome. I think that's not what we should be aiming for, particularly if we live in a capitalistic society. Equality of outcome does nothing for any of us that are trying to innovate and move things ahead. But equality of opportunity is something that I am a staunch believer of. And I think that we need to keep making sure that we include everybody. And I think what ended up happening with what went down with the decision, not the decision, but the outburst that came from a very loud, small group of people, we ended up missing an opportunity to be inclusive of another community. And I don't know how we're going to be able to make that reconnection happen, but I hope that we're more cognizant of the way that we move forward and the messaging that that's sending to other communities that we decide we want to shut down. Because when you're shutting down somebody's government, you're also potentially shutting down or sending a message to the community that live under that government. We don't want to be a part of you. We don't want you to be a part of us. And that's against what we're trying to do, I believe. It's against what I'm trying to do anyway.
Yeah, it's there. It all seems to be indicative of a lot of the issues of discomfort that we have with the way that power is currently distributed.
I agree. And I think that the only way that we're going to get these kinds of things out there and get people hearing each other is when people start having rational conversations. This is an example of a rational conversation for anyone who's wondering.
It's because I haven't started yelling yet.
You're welcome to yell.
Okay, wait. I have to turn on the gain on my microphone here.
You're welcome to yell. We'll probably end the conversation very quickly, just because that's, you know, I don't feel that like a lot of there was an interesting situation online where I was in conversation with somebody, and it was a public conversation. This person had posted how proud he was that SCA had pulled out of Dubai, and he's proud to be a part of that coffee industry. And all I said was, hey, for whatever it's worth, I have friends that are gay and are living in Dubai, and they've been happily living there for a long time. And the vitriol that came at me after that was disgusting. It was irrational. It was illogical. It was completely off the topic. It was just about barraging me because I had apparently a differing opinion. And all I said was, have any of you all been to Dubai? Do any of you actually know whether Dubai is like that or it isn't like that? It's just what you're hearing from reporters who have reported in the news about stuff that we typically know can be all about clickbait. And didn't matter. People were talking around me, although to me, saying another cis white woman talking about shit she doesn't understand about. I'm like, well, I kind of do. I'm from that culture. I get it. I understand why y'all are talking about how oppressive the Arab culture is. Dubai is like the New York of the Middle East. What the fuck are you all saying?
Yeah, it's tough. I don't know. These are really complex issues. It's like we don't want to necessarily encourage the idea that it's okay to be intolerant. Like that's
exactly.
And so that leads us to want to call out these issues very strongly. But it also that acts against our need to be inclusive and grow our community and grow understanding and empathy. And it's like, this is where I start to understand that, like, you know, I'm not a religious person, but I start to understand why Jesus was seen as such a radical, or like that idea is seen so radical as, like, you know, let he who has not sinned throw the first stone. It's just trying to create a bigger community where we can all understand each other and
exactly
grow together.
Right. And
like, you know, I'm sitting here as a white dude, and I try to do my best to just sit and listen and learn, because I think that's all I can do. Because, you know, this privilege that is lived and that has given me access to opportunities that other people don't have requires me to learn about other people's experiences, so that when I have the opportunity to wield that power, I can elect to use it differently than I might otherwise.
Yeah, I really appreciate your perspective on that. And I think the coffee world has lost something by not having someone like you go to Dubai. You know, you have so much that you could teach the people who are just getting started in Dubai. The relationships that you could help them build. They've got so much fucking money over there. To have them investing that into the coffee farms where they could be paying more money if they knew how to spend it.
Sure.
You know, I feel like someone like you not being over in Dubai and going for a trip to Dubai, we've lost something. Our industry has lost something. And if you ever want to go, you let me know and you and I will go together.
Sounds great.
I even convinced Scott. He's like, listen, okay, if you're going, I'll go. So maybe the three of us, we'll bring Lucia as well. Maybe the four of us should head over and do something like that. I promise I'll protect you.
I'm not that worried. You know, my kind has, yeah. I've flown through Dubai on my way to Africa, but I've never spent any time there outside of the airport.
It's actually a phenomenal city. It's such a mind fuck because there is so much money in this city. And, you know, let's just build an island that looks like a pineapple. And we're going to put a resort on it, or we're going to build an island that looks like the globe of the world, and different celebrities are going to buy each country and build their mansions on there.
I'm so conflicted.
Right?
Because then I'm like, well, this is oil money we're talking about.
Look, it's a whole bunch of stuff. A lot of it is development money. A lot of it is developers that have come from, because Dubai doesn't want to rely on oil. Dubai wants to build. It's a very new country. I believe it's only 40 or 50 years old. So they're trying to build an economy that isn't reliant purely on oil. And so the development that's going on there is about attracting money from outside and building a cosmopolitan city that is quite open. So you're not going to experience the same kind of Sharia law in Dubai, as there's nothing like that as you'd experience in Iran. Sure. You know, you don't even get anywhere close to what you experience in Iran, in Syria.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just want people to be talking to other people about stuff rather than making assumptions on how these things are. And the other thing I want people to remember is change doesn't go from step 1 to step 50 without the 50 steps in between. You know, we have to extend a hand of welcome to a new community. And when you do something like that, you know, it's called compassion, it's called empathy, it's all of those things. You see what comes from that is exactly what we're trying to achieve in the coffee industry, this idea of inclusion. And yes, I think we did miss the boat with this one. And I don't blame the Dubai coffee community for being upset about that, but I know the way that Arabs think, and I think that they would jump at the opportunity to be able to prove the world wrong. And they want to be welcoming. Can you imagine what it would be like to be loved up upon the way that I know our coffee community can, like to go over there and have people from Australia and America and Europe turn up to Dubai and want to drink coffee in these new specialty coffee shops. Imagine that brings a tear to a cafe owner's eyes.
Yeah, and you know, there's always going to be more that unites us than separates us. You just have to turn towards those things, and then hopefully everything else follows.
And when I was talking to people outside of America about this decision, we were confused by why it was only Americans that were so angry about the deferred candidacy.
Sure.
There was a piece, I think, written by Ashley Rodriguez or someone in Barista Mag saying exactly that. That even though she herself is quite outraged by the deferred candidacy thing, she was walking the floor at the Worlds last year and she said, I have to tell you all, this is what's going on. People just wondering what all the confusion is about. So yeah, I think we've got a long way to go, and we missed it, but we need to. We need to do better as an industry.
Change starts here at home, right? So welcome people into your cafes. Hire based on skill and include diversity in that. Like, just be as open as possible and try to meet people where they are. I think that's all we can do.
Yeah.
Build community.
And with that, I would also add, be cognizant of people's limitations with regards to their culture. They're people who perhaps grew up not knowing any different. And so instead of crucifying them for having those ideas, give them the opportunity to experience you as a person, and you'll see that will start to shift just naturally. Yeah. I've been battling it my whole life.
Yeah.
As a woman, as an Arab, I was stuck between two cultures. I would go to school and they'd tell me, we have this word in Australia, that wog. And a wog is someone who is either Arab or Italian or Greek. I think the term here for it is fob. And we can call ourselves wogs, but when an Aussie calls us a wog, it's derogatory. So I would go to school and they would tell me, stop being a wog, you're Australian. And I would go home and they would say to me, stop being Australian, you're an Arab. And I was constantly, like what happens with most first generation kids, I was trying to figure out where I fit in. And I always felt excluded. So, that doesn't help the situation that we've got in the coffee industry if what we're doing is not saying, hey, I'm just going to understand who you are and I'm going to be inclusive of who you are, and I'm going to start knowing that you've probably got some issues with me, but I'm just going to be me, and I'm going to be that in the most compassionate, empathetic way that I can. And that means that I'm just going to be present.
Yeah. I think that's great. I definitely practice empathy as much as I can.
As we've established, you're not the normal coffee person. That's a compliment.
Wow. I'm just like, whatever. I'm just over here doing my thing.
I think that was the thing that when I met you, I think that's the thing that attracted me to you, was that this is a guy who's just him. He's not trying to be anyone else. He's not making any apologies for who he is. He's not pretending. He's just being this Christopher guy that I've just met. And I like that because I don't experience enough of it in the coffee industry.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. I'm glad I'm faking it so well. This is perfect. I missed a second career in drama or something. Yeah. I don't know. My philosophy is just, it's simple. It's do cool shit and show it to people. I don't know. Invite them in.
What other cool shit do you do?
So I'm obsessed with baking sourdough. So I have my sourdough starter that's years old, and I bake sourdough every Sunday religiously. I guess that's my religion. And that, I'm drink and make cocktails. I play music. I've been playing music since I was a kid.
What do you play?
So I started playing when I was 10. I played drums, guitar, keys.
So everything.
Yeah. If I pick up an instrument, I'll figure it out. So in school, I studied audio engineering in addition to cyber law and psychology and sociology.
This is that choose your own adventure degree that you did.
I sure did choose my own adventure. And my thesis was on Napster and the history of the legislation for intellectual property in American law, basically focusing on Napster. So music file sharing and things like that. So
you're clearly an underachiever.
Yeah, pretty lazy. I actually picked the classes that fit into my interests because I figured that I could just like phone it in and just write the paper at the end. So it worked really well.
Tell me about sourdough, because it's something that I have been wanting to start doing for like a couple years now, and I've got a gluten intolerance.
Okay, sure. So gluten intolerance is tough because gluten is part of the magic of it. But if you have a proper fermentation, you know, if it's just an intolerance and not celiac, it might make it more digestible for you because you let the microbes do the work.
Yeah.
So I got into bread. I can't remember how long ago, but someone gave me the book Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast, I think by Ken Forkish. And that was the first book I ever read about bread and started playing with that. And then I got the Tartine bread book. And Chad has this section in the beginning just about the way that our understanding of bread has shifted from how it was 100 years ago. It used to be the cornerstone of the diet. And like, you know, you'd eat your pound of bread a day, but it was made differently from different ingredients. And it's just, it's been completely transformed by process and mechanization and manufacturing, really. So if you kind of get into that slower pace of things and a lot of things that are popular in American culture right now, I just really like to work with my hands. I like to let the magic of these microbes do their work because you're essentially building a microbiome of yeast and bacteria that are fermenting the sugars in the flour and turning it into other things that are delicious. And yeah, I don't know. I really like it. I'm still very haphazard with it because it requires somewhat of a schedule, and I cannot keep a schedule for the life of me. So, you know, my breads are always different shapes and sizes, and, you know, I always cut too vigorously when I'm scoring the dough and all that. But it always tastes delicious. I have fun when I do it, and I find it very centering, and get to be home with my dog one day a week, where it's just like he knows it's like bread day, and yeah.
Your Instagram feed, especially your stories, is so much fun because I'm always hungry when I watch them. And I'm always wishing I had a dog when I see you hanging with your dog.
Yeah, he's the best. He's like I have a lot of houseplants, and he's kind of like a houseplant. He just hangs out on the couch at home. I water him, make sure he gets some sunlight, and he's happy. All of his toys
are very well groomed.
Yeah, well, he has to be. I think he's part Pom. He's a mutt, a rescue, so I don't really know, but he gets very fluffy if I don't groom him. So
I thought that you were plant-based until the other day. I don't know why. Just you were having so many plant-based recipes, and then eggs showed up when you were making your own birthday cake.
I eat mostly plant-based, but I do eat eggs and butter are the two holdovers. But it's like I know the people who produce them, and because I walk up to the little corner shop in my neighborhood, and, you know, it's Ohio. We've got a big industry here, so a lot of little farmers who are in the city and doing their thing. So yeah, those are kind of the two exceptions, but yeah, otherwise vegetarian.
Otherwise, because you made some fucking burgers that looked amazing, made out of beets.
Oh yeah, that was beets and quinoa and black beans, and you got to caramelize the onions first. That's really important to establish that complexity that you get from the Maillard reaction. And then just you dehydrate them a little bit in the oven so they stay together. You can add some flax if you want, and then they grill like normal. They're just amazing. Maybe a little bit of cumin, or I think I put some chile cobanero, which is a Guatemalan chili, in there. Yeah, it's awesome. So good.
Dude, you're making me hungry. I did want to ask you, going back to coffee for a minute.
Yeah.
You know, this really is a conversation when you come on here. Oops, I just want to poke that microphone down so it's not sticking up. The other day I read an article that coffee farmers are starting to grow. Was it avocados? No, they were starting to grow something else because it's 4 times more profitable than it is to grow coffee.
Sure.
Do you see that that's going to become, when people talk about the sustainability issues that we're experiencing as an industry, do you think that that's going to contribute in a big way if we don't get this pricing thing under control?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look at Kenya. Like, coffee is it's a fairly new industry in Kenya, which is a result of the colonial system. But exports in Kenya have declined 70% over the last 30 or 40 years. And it's because of the rapid expansion of Nairobi, and people are finding that their land is more valuable as real estate than it is for producing coffee. Or you look in Ethiopia in the Harar region. Many farmers are ripping up their coffee and planting chat because chat can be harvested continuously, so it's more liquid versus coffee, which is once a year harvest and prone to lots of crop failures. So
Chat is that drug that they chew, right?
Mildly psychoactive stimulant. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is it the same kind of thing as why people are planting poppy rather than coffee?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, and that the poppy is especially, and coca. It's like that's where our culture is continuing to cause lots of issues around the world. But we have an appetite for the stuff, and then we want to condemn the world and go in and bring our machine guns and and cause regime change everywhere. And awesome.
Such a fucked up hurricane.
Yeah, it's true.
The whole thing. I mean, these issues are so complex that just trying to say, well, let's just stop everyone from taking drugs. Yeah, good luck with that.
But what can we do on a personal basis and with our businesses to be more responsible and respectful?
Yeah, and I mean, we won't have an industry if we don't look after these farmers.
That's right.
And if we don't do the kinds of things that what you're saying.
Just respect them. Just see them as people who are trying to make a living and have a life and raise families. And we need them and they need us. So let's figure that out.
I hear a bunch of people who do go to Origin say what you said earlier in be nice to them and be kind to them. What do you mean by that? Are people not being like that?
I have seen some people come from supply country or a demand side of the supply chain come in and kind of be demanding and not really understand all of the work and risk that is involved in coffee production, or not really understand the financial systems, the way that they're set up in these countries where, a farmer might only get paid once a year and have to sell the coffee, or there are some here. Let's lay this out. In Kenya, for example,
okay.
I produce coffee. I take it to the factory and have it processed, and then I need to sell it. Great. You take it to your marketing agent who gets a cut, and the marketing agent sells it to the exporter, and the exporter gets the final sale. So you might harvest your coffee in January and not receive payment until it's finally sold in, let's say, August. Okay. So you are basically floating that money, right? Because you haven't gotten paid yet, and you need to start buying your inputs and your supplies and reinvesting, and you've got a family. So what do? You borrow the money. So you borrow the money at 20, 30, 40% interest rates.
Fuck. Are you serious?
Yeah. 20 would be good.
Who are they borrowing the money from? Are they borrowing it from locals? Are they borrowing it from the importers, the brokers? Where are they getting the money?
Often they're affiliated with the exporters, or there are banks and other financial systems set up. But it's basically usury. It's like a very common thing in coffee producing countries. Like if you go in and say, this isn't good enough, I'm not going to buy it, after you've given like tacit contractual, terms that you're going to buy their harvest, you just screwed them. And then they're going to have to sell to a coyote, which is going to be pennies on the dollar, really, of the true value of that coffee. So I don't know. It's just, they're welcoming us into their homes. They're showing us their culture. They're feeding us. We share their table and meals with them. Yeah, I've slept in the same house as them. Just it's an amazing opportunity to really learn what life could be like if you were born in a different place, and do what you can with the resources you have to make it work as well as possible for everybody.
Do you have any, while we have you, do you have any etiquette tips for people that are going to Origin for the first time?
Remember that you are not in your home country is the first thing. Like I say, I'm vegetarian, but when I'm eating in somebody else's home, there's a chance that they butchered their very special animal. I will eat it, and I will be very grateful. And chances are it might not be something that I would want to eat anyway, if I had my choice. But understand that if it's normal there, it shouldn't freak you out. Pretty much just try and be quiet, listen as much as possible. Ask good questions, ask about, everyone has something to say about their family. Everyone's proud of the work they do. Figure out what people are proud of and just engage with them there.
And be humble.
Be humble. Yeah, that's definitely key. Yeah.
When these farmers welcome you onto their properties, do they typically let you stay there for free?
Oh yeah.
So I guess doing something like, showing your gratitude by giving them something extra, is that something that's acceptable, or do they find that offensive?
I always bring gifts. So I will bring gifts from America. I will bring gifts from my company. Like, for example, bring back their roasted coffee. I really like to get in the kitchen, which sometimes freaks people out depending which country you're in, because I'm a man going into the kitchen. Yep. But I really love to do that, to humble myself. And I also really want to learn about the local cuisine. I like to make coffee for my hosts, and share with them how we make it in the US.
How do they react?
A lot of the time they're always excited. Even if it's not to their liking, they'll say, "Oh, it's too acidic," or whatever. They're always like, they think it's so fascinating to watch the whole process. So it's really cool. And if you don't speak their language, that's okay too. There are still ways you can communicate. Yeah.
How do you communicate? I know you speak Spanish, right?
Poorly, but I understand it. So it gets me by.
So when you have you been to Kenya?
Yeah, I've been to Kenya.
So how do you communicate with people in Kenya? Excuse my ignorance. I find this stuff fascinating. I'm all about human connection and human relationships. And I find that when people like you, who are humble and who know
You're the
how
only
to talk
person
to
who's
people.
ever called me humble, by the way. Just put that out there.
I'm an enormously nuanced individual that sees beyond all the bullshit that people put forward. And I would never have wanted to have a conversation with you if there wasn't a part of you that was humble. So, and the fact that you can go to countries like this and try to fit in with them, that's the kind of humble that I think teaches people.
I see. Well, Kenya is maybe not a good example because it was completely controlled by the British until about 50 years ago. So pretty much everyone speaks English, in addition to either their local language or Swahili or whatever it is. But say Ethiopia, you'll definitely need an interpreter. So
do you hire that locally?
Yeah, or the exporter or importer will. But someone who to drive and someone to interpret is pretty common. Most of my travel in recent years has been to Latin America, so it's much easier going to Spanish-speaking countries. But yeah, it's almost better when you don't feel comfortable speaking the language at first, because you're just forced to be an observer. And in that kind of quiet posture, you learn a lot pretty quickly.
I can imagine that it's a very humbling, very eye-opening experience to be in a country that you weren't raised in. Just watching this thing that you're going to be working with back in the US, and it just must be a humbling experience.
Absolutely. It gives you a lot of respect for it. And, I think about my waste at the cafe now, not only because of the dollars and cents of, I know what I paid for this coffee, just the amount of human energy that went into producing this.
I don't know if you'll know the answer to this question, but do a lot of people plant coffee because they love coffee, or do they plant it because that's the best thing agriculturally for what they're doing?
There are all sorts of coffee producers. Some of the younger generation are choosing to produce coffee, which is really exciting. And these are the people we really need to engage with and continue our specialty buying practices and fixed contracts and maintain that excitement. A lot of people around the world, though, grow coffee because they grow coffee. They grew up on the farm, or they got it from a relative or whatever, and coffee was already there. And so they're doing the best they can with what they have. That's very common. Or because someone occupied and controlled their country and forced them to plant it. That's also very common.
Will we had a conversation in Sydney going back about 5 years with a couple of people who were buyers in Sydney, and we were talking about the price, the C price. They broke it down for us, and the question was asked: what is the amount that we should be paying per pound for the farmers to get paid fairly?
It depends.
And the guesstimate was somewhere around $5 US a pound if people were to get paid fairly. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say it totally depends. Depends which country you're talking about, what efficiencies are there. I think that if every producer were as efficient as possible, that number could be lower. It depends on the exchange rate and cost of living. It's an immensely complex puzzle, and there's some work being done. There's a research project that I'm a participant in, where we're basically donating our contracts for the next however many years the project goes on, so that we can establish ranges for specialty coffee prices at this quality from this region. This is what was paid FOB and eventually farm gate for that coffee. Because once you understand that, then you can look at the production side and say, okay, what are your costs and how are these aligned or misaligned?
What does that mean, you're donating your contracts?
Basically saying, okay, this is a ledger of all of the coffee I've purchased.
It's the data that you're donating. You're contributing the data.
That's correct. And so it'll all be anonymized, but it's from many of the major specialty companies and some of the smaller companies who are willing to share their data, so that this can be aggregated and shared with suppliers as well as buyers.
If we were going to start focusing at the barista level, so the people who are, or the roaster level, people who are not out there buying coffee, if we were going to start focusing our education process in one place, where should we start other than this conversation?
What do you mean?
So to help people understand, if they are the roaster or the barista, and we want them to get a better understanding of exactly what role they play in being able to improve the quality that the beginning of the supply chain experiences. I would say people should start at Dear Coffee Buyer, but the book by Ryan Brown. But what other things can people do? What conversations can people get into to start improving their understanding of how their practices in the cafe and the roastery can be better affected, so that they positively influence the beginning of the supply chain?
Sure. The first thing would be to understand your craft well enough that you're sure you're presenting that coffee in the best possible light. This is important for roasters as well as baristas, anybody who's interacting with that coffee. Because once you're sure you're looking at it in its best possible light, then you can actually have things to say about it. But that's presuming that you've done the work to educate yourself about what the range of coffee is. So taste everything. I'm not just saying coffee. Taste everything with an open, critical mind, and
taste it blind.
Taste it blind. Really develop that taste memory and that sensory language, so that you know when you taste something that's spectacular. And I believe that good is good for most people. So you'll know. But once you have decided that something has potential and could be improved, chances are you won't know how to improve it. This is the case when you either don't have the training or don't have the information or something's missing. How do you deliver feedback to the person? Maybe you talk to the buyer, you talk to the importer and say, hey, I tasted this. What are you doing to improve this? That's a really good question. Or what would you like to try for next year? Just find out what's in their head first before you impose your ideas about what should happen. Because maybe you say, well, I taste this coffee and I noticed that you dried it on patios, but all of the coffee that I buy that scored 86 or higher was dried on raised beds. They might have a reason for drying on a patio that
you're going to sound like an absolute dick if you say that to someone. Just FYI.
It happens all the time. it happens all the time where roasters or buyers will, give their feedback in that way and say, oh, you're not fermenting long enough. And then the next year it's all molded and spoiled. And we're like, oh, this really did not go the direction that you wanted it to. So I think what you can say is, hey, are you doing any experiments with X? That's one way that you can encourage the idea without having them feel that pressure of no one's going to buy my coffee unless I do this.
Could the other thing be that if you taste a coffee that you believe in your experience was exceptional, that you reach out to the farmer through social media and tell them?
Yeah, I've done that, and I'll usually engage in a conversation. And the next year I'll set up a fixed contract with built-in premiums. Is typically what I do.
And how has your experience been with that? Do farmers really like people to do that? Do they feel encouraged and motivated by that?
The younger generation does. I think some of them, the older generation, and today's my birthday. I'm 31, so like I look at young as somewhere around my age. Chicken. I know, but I'm old and wise now, actually, as of today. So,
as of today, because it happens in a second. It happens on a specific moment of your life, right?
Good to go. But some people are just very confused by the whole social media thing, which is like, I just think of my parents and it's fine. But some people are really excited and they're like, oh, cool, I get to talk to somebody. So like, I was talking with a Brazilian producer and we calibrated our cupping procedure, which was like amazing because they're like, oh, I taste what you're tasting now. And it's like, awesome. Can't wait to see what you do with that. Like, no, we're tasting in the same way. That's awesome.
So if I find a coffee that I really like and I want to go and find the farmer and I send them a social media message, I have wanted to do that before and not done it because all of their social media has been in Spanish and I don't know how to speak Spanish. So should I send, is that, I don't want to offend. Would that be okay to do that? Because I know it sometimes gets it wrong.
Google Translate has gotten really, really good. Their machine learning has been kind of amazing. That's how I speak to people in Brazil when they only speak Portuguese. Yeah, and it works great. And WhatsApp is a great tool for those conversations. But I think you can reach out and say, hello, my name is Lee. I loved your coffee. Do you speak English?
Yeah, right. That's a great. That's awesome because it's, and I'm not ashamed of admitting that. Sometimes I'm shy to say that because I don't want to offend. I'm very sensitive to people's cultural sensitivities. So I don't want to send someone a message in English or in Spanish and it's wrong and they may get offended. Oh, who's this fucking white girl who thinks she's, what business does she have to contact me?
Sure.
But I'm going to make an effort to do that from now on. And, the worst they can do is just not respond. But I think when people do things that are great, I do it with restaurants all the time. If I go to a restaurant or I eat some bread that was amazing, I always contact them through social media and just say, thank you, that was incredible.
Yeah. And that it feels so good. I mean, you've probably experienced this too, but as someone who operates cafes, if someone reaches out to tell me what an amazing experience they had or like how much they loved the coffee. I had one guy write in from Canada saying, I ordered your coffee randomly and I loved it. And it's just like, you never get those messages.
No, we got a social media message from a guy by the name of Chris Versace and for Elixir. And that was incredible. He's an investment guru, for lack of a better word, and he has his own podcast, and they deal specifically with luxury branding and luxury items in the investment world. And he reached out and he was saying, this has changed my life. I need to have Elixir all the time, and I want you to come and talk on my podcast about it. And I just thought, wow, how small the world is now. One, I was chuffed that this person who had never been exposed to my product walked into a store. Shout out to Merit Coffee in San Antonio.
Oh yeah, I love them.
They're amazing humans. I love everybody that works there. But he walked in there and he saw the product and he loves them, and so he was drawn to it. He bought a bottle, and while he was sitting there drinking it, went online and bought 3 Elixir Trios or 2 Elixir Trios and had them shipped to other people. And there's nothing that feels greater than knowing that somebody's experiencing the thing that your hands have created.
Yeah.
And they've chosen not only to put that in their own body, they've chosen to give it to other people to have the same experience. And so, yeah, I just think that it's such an important thing for us to tell the people at the farms. I've just been really shy to do it.
Yeah. And it's amazing because so many of the producers have no idea who is consuming their coffee, who's roasting their coffee even sometimes. So it's really neat to try and make that chain smaller.
So maybe that's something that we can do as a barista community, a very small thing that we can do, but still something nonetheless. We can actually just reach out to the farmers and just say, hey, thanks, this made my day. I want you to know that I really enjoyed your coffee.
Sure, just be very careful from there.
Christopher, it has been an absolute pleasure, my friend.
Likewise.
Our industry is lucky to have you. Please keep spreading your wisdom. I'm very excited as the owner of Elixir to be doing the three-way that we're going to be doing, you and Lucia and I, and that's just going to be a lot of fun. But your roasted coffee brand is Phoenix Coffee.
That's right. How
can people find you?
Easiest thing in the world, phoenixcoffee.com.
I love when things are logical.
Mm-hmm.
Have a fantastic rest of your birthday.
Thank you.
And may this be the best one yet and the worst one for the rest of your life.
Ooh, I like that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have an amazing rest of your day. Bye, friend.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.